Hello, I welcome you all. In this video, you'll be learning that to really be an informed and educated participant in our society, it is important to understand the field of macroeconomics. So many a times we hear or see news about the economy in the media. For example, things like the RBI reduced the interest rates for the third time this year, or maybe you read in the newspaper that the unemployment rate increased to 7.9% this quarter. So, all these are macroeconomic issues because they involve how the economy is functioning overall, right? And when we really understand what these are trying to tell us, then we become much better citizens because we are educated about these issues and we are much more capable of participating in our government and society. It's also really important to understand how our economy functions overall, right? We really can only participate in something effectively when we understand how it functions. So, for example, if you hear that maybe interest rates are going to rise in the near future, and if you don't know how that might impact you yourself, you're not effectively participating in our society. Say you don't know how it might impact your spending and your saving habits now or in the future, when do they rise? So that's just one example of how understanding these things are very important to you personally and as a participant in our economy, right? So, our learning objectives will be as follows. We'll be first understanding that why we really need to study macroeconomics. Secondly, we'll understand the difference between micro and macroeconomics. We'll see some examples of micro and macroeconomics. We'll discuss stories of three economists, Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes. And then we'll be looking at the meaning of factors of production, right? Now the question arises that why are we actually studying the subject of macroeconomics? So when the price of a product you want to buy goes up, it affects you. But why does the price go up? Is it that demand is greater than supply? Or does the cost go up because of the raw materials needed to make it? Or is it a war in an unknown country that affects the price? So, to answer all these questions, we need to turn to macroeconomics. So, macroeconomists try to forecast economic conditions to help consumers, firms, and governments make better decisions. Let's say consumers, if I talk about consumers, so consumers want to know how easy it will be to find work or how much it will cost to buy goods and services in the market, etc. Then firms or businesses use macroeconomic analysis to determine whether expanding production will be welcomed by the market. Will consumers have enough money to buy the products, or will the products sit idle on shelves and collect dust, right? Now, governments also turn to macroeconomists when imposing taxes, deciding on interest rates, and making policy decisions, right? Now, let's understand the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Now, we all know that economics is the study of how individual and society make choices in the presence of scarcity of resources, right? And how the levels of national income and employment are determined and what determines their growth, right? Now, the study of economics is divided into two important branches. They are microeconomics and another one is macroeconomics, right? And you all are already familiar with the study of basic microeconomics in class 11th. Now let's look at the difference between them. Now, broadly speaking, macroeconomics deals with the behavior of aggregate economy, and microeconomics actually focuses on individual consumers and businesses, right? So if I talk about microeconomics. So the term micro is derived from the Greek word micro, which means small. Micro matlab chota. Macro is derived again from the Greek word macro, which means large, right? The second point says that obviously that in microeconomics we are dealing only with individual economic units, but when I'm talking about macroeconomics, it deals with the study of economy as a whole. The third point says that we are actually dealing with individual income, output and prices of the goods, but on the other hand, macroeconomics actually deals with the aggregates. When we are talking about national output, when we are talking about unemployment, when we are talking about inflation, then we are looking at the economy as a whole. Then we talk about macroeconomics. Now it accounts for factors like demand and supply of a particular commodity. So when we are looking at the particular commodity, and we're looking at the factors like demand and supply of a particular commodity, then we're talking about micro. On the other hand, when I'm talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, I'm talking about macro. Now micro is also known as the price theory, whereas macro is also known as the theory of income and employment. It deals with the central problems of allocation of resources and related principles. We've discussed that in class 11th, that if you remember, in class 11th we talked about central problems of an economy, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, and we talked about allocation of resources, since resources are limited and they can put into alternative uses. All that comes under the banner of microeconomics. But when I'm talking about determination of level of income and employment and related principles and policies, then I'm really talking about macroeconomics. Now let's look at some examples. This is very important from exam point of view. I'll tell you how. So if you look at particular examples, let's say if I am talking about price determination of a particular commodity, I'm talking about micro. When I'm looking at the consumer behavior theory, or when I'm looking at the theory of the firm, or when I'm looking at a particular production of a mill, say sugar mill, or when I'm looking at a particular car industry, right, then all of these comes under microeconomics. But when I'm talking about general price level of the whole nation, when I'm talking about the fiscal and monetary policy of a whole nation, when I'm talking about the foreign exchange rate, when I'm talking about poverty as a nation, poverty of a nation, when I'm talking about national income of the whole region, GDP, then I am talking about macroeconomy, because I am talking about these issues as a whole, right? Now the question comes as one marker, right? So they'll say that identify which of the following comes under the banner of micro and macro, and they'll give you 4 options. So from those 4 examples, you have to choose one. So if your concept is clear, you can really answer that question, right? So basically microeconomics and macroeconomics are not separate subjects, but they are rather complementary perspectives on the overall subject of the economy. So to understand why both microeconomics and macroeconomics perspectives are useful, consider the problem of studying a biological ecosystem like a lake. Right now, one person who sets out to study the lake might focus on specific topics like certain kinds of algae or plant life, the characteristics of a particular fish or snails, or the trees surrounding the lake. Another person might take an overall view and instead consider the entire ecosystem of the lake from top to bottom, what eats what, how the system remains in balance, and what environmental stress affect this balance. So both approaches are useful, and both researchers are studying the same lake, but the viewpoints are different, right? So in a similar way, both microeconomics and macroeconomics studies the same economy, but each has a different perspective and focus. So in economics, the micro decisions of individual businesses are influenced by the health of the macro economy. For example, firms will be more likely to hire workers if the overall economy is growing. In turn, the performance of the macroeconomy ultimately depends on the microeconomic decisions made by the individual households and businesses, meaning that both microeconomics and macroeconomics are interrelated with each other. So if there is something happening at the micro level, it will impact at the macro level, and if something is happening at the macro level, it will impact at the micro level. So both are interrelated, plus both are complementary perspectives, right? Now, let's look at some of the examples of micro and macro. When I'm looking at these set of questions, then I'm really talking about microeconomics. What type of questions? For example, if I say that what combination of goods and services will best fit consumer needs and wants given the budget they have to spend. So for example, I'm a consumer and I really want to buy something. Given my budget, what will I choose, right? So all this kind of question will come under micro, since I'm talking only of an individual, I'm talking only of a consumer. And then if how will a firm finance its business, since I'm talking only about a firm, then obviously this question will come under microeconomics. Then again, what determines how a firm will produce its product, whether whether the firm will be using labor intensive technique or a capital intensive technique. Since I'm talking about a firm, it will come under microeconomics. Then what determines how many workers it will hire, how many workers a firm will hire. Then how do people decide how much to save for the future? What determines how households and individuals spend their budget, right? So if you look at all these questions, you see that there is one familiar thing, there is one common thing, that we are looking only at an individual entity, right? So when we are answering these set of questions, then we are merely talking about microeconomics, right? On the other hand, let's look at the list of the questions under macroeconomics. First one is how many goods and services a nation should actually produce. Now listen, the key word is nation, right? Now we are talking about of the economy as a whole. That's why it's under the banner of macroeconomics. Then what causes the economy to speed up or slow down? Since we're talking about the economy as a whole, comes under macroeconomics. What causes firms to hire more workers or lay them off? We're talking about a firms, right? Not a firm. Now, will the prices as a whole rise or come down? We're talking about prices as a whole. Then is the employment condition of the country as a whole getting better or is it worsening? This question, obviously, since we're talking about country as a whole, we're talking about aggregates. This will come under macro. Macro means large, micro means small, Greek word. Then what causes the economy to grow over the long term, right? We're talking about the economy as a whole. So I hope you've got the crux of these two concepts. Now let's talk about economic thought. Now, economics is a study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. Try to understand this phrase, and this phrase was given by the 19th century economist Alfred Marshall. Now, what choices do you face in the ordinary business of your life? Like you, for example, buying clothes or deciding what to eat or seeking a job. All these involve considerations of cost, scarcity, and trade-offs with other options, right? Now, whether or not you think of them as such, these all are economic decisions. Now extend that idea to scales beyond your individual transactions. Modern society is made up together by a complex network of individual choices with local, national, and even global implications. So economics is the field of knowledge that seeks to systematically analyze, interpret, and understand these decisions, right? Now we'll be looking at three economists, namely Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes, and they've contributed substantially to the development of economics as a science, and we'll discuss each of these personalities in brief, right? Now, the first one, Adam Smith, he was born in 1723 and till 1790, and his major focus was on invisible hand, right? Now, when Adam Smith was born, and he's also regarded as the father of modern economics, right? Now, when Adam Smith was born, actually, industrialization and a profit-driven market system was prevalent. Now, as a professor and a lecturer, and also as a government economic advisor, Smith had a comprehensive understanding of economics. economics, which was captured in an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, better known as The Wealth of Nations, which was published in 1776. Now, this can come for you one marker, that is, who wrote the book named Wealth of Nations, or who is considered to be the father of modern economics. So, you should know that which economist wrote which book and in which year. So now you know the answer, that he is Adam Smith. So the book actually describes a world increasingly dominated by commerce and capitalism, since it was written during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? Now, Adam Smith also talked about division of labor in his book. Now, what is this? Now, let's understand this concept with the help of an example. Now, suppose I want to build up my own house. Now, I need someone to do the plumbing. I need someone to do the plastering of my house. I need someone to do fitting part, and I need someone to do some electrical work, right? Now, one person alone can't do all these things, since a particular skill is required in order to do a particular task. So when a new house is built, such specialists focus on those specific tasks only. So this is division of labor. We have actually divided the task between persons who are specialized in doing that particular टास्क, राइट? हमने एक ही इंसान को पूरा काम नहीं दिया, हमने डिवाइड कर दिया. हमने इलेक्ट्रीशियन को अलग बुलाया, हमने पेंट करने वाले को अलग बनाया. इससे क्या हुआ, हमारा टाइम भी बच गया. अगर हम एक ही इंसान को दे देते तो मे बी टाइम भी ज़्यादा लगता. अब हमने सबको अलग अलग डिवीज़न कर दिया है काम का बिटवीन लेबर, तो अब काम एफिशिएंटली भी होगा क्योंकि वो स्पेशलाइज्ड है अपने काम में, प्लस कम टाइम में भी उनका काम कंप्लीट हो जाएगा, राइट? सो इन अदर वर्ड्स, द डिविजन ऑफ लेबर इनेबल्ड वन मैन टू बी एज मच एज 4,800 टाइम्स मोर प्रोडक्टिव देन इफ द वर्क एंड देन इफ ही वर्कड अलोन. अगर वो अकेले काम करता तो इतना प्रोडक्टिव नहीं होता जितना हमने बाकी लोगों को काम दे दिया है, राइट? The next point is self-interest motive of people. Now, in addition, Smith argued that people have a natural drive to improve their own lives. Like वो अपने बारे में ही सोचते हैं लोग ज़्यादातर. Now, this self-interest propels markets to satisfy individual demands by producing the goods and services people want. Now, suppose I want something, so firms will produce that commodity for me. So he said that the economy will always be in equilibrium, where my supply will always be equal to demand, right? Then he talked about invisible hand. Now, the invisible hand of the market creates predictable economic systems such as supply and demand, because humans are relatively predictable in their behavior. For example, if you predict that when you go to the supermarket there will be eggs and milk for sale, now the supermarket in turn predicts that the distributors will deliver eggs and milk regularly to their warehouses. And lastly, the distributors will predict that farmers will offer eggs and milk for sale. So all of this has to happen regularly every day, in fact, to ensure that fresh eggs and milk are available all across the country. Now, who controls this process? No one, right? So it happens because each person or company is predictable enough in their behavior to make the whole system run. Now, this is what Adam Smith was referring to as the invisible hand of the market, right? Now, let's just understand this. Suppose we have a very healthy economy, right? So suppose we have a very healthy economy, right? Now, because of this healthy economy, demand for cars increases, right? My demand for cars increases. Now, if people are demanding more, I will be producing more, right? Now, if I am producing more, I'll be needing more workers, right? I'll be hiring more workers. If I want to hire more workers, I have to pay them higher salaries, क्योंकि मुझे पता है ऑलरेडी हेल्दी इकोनॉमी चल रही है, मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल विल ऑलरेडी बी एम्प्लॉयड, और अगर मुझे उसको अपनी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्री में लेकर आना है, कार की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्री में लेकर आना है, तो मुझे उस इंसान को ज़्यादा सैलरी देनी पड़ेगी, नहीं तो वो कहीं और चला जाएगा। तो ये सारा फिनोमेना अपने आप ही हो रहा है, इनविजिबल हैंड अपने आप ही चल रहा है और अपने आप ही ये फिनोमेना हो रहा है। मतलब हेल्दी इकोनॉमी है तो डिमांड ज़्यादा बढ़ रही है कार्स की, तो ऑटोमेटिकली फर्म्स ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस करेंगे। ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस करेंगे तो ऑब्वियसली उनको वर्कर्स चाहिए होंगे उस कार को मैन्युफैक्चर करने के लिए, तो अब वो क्या करेंगे, ऑटोमेटिकली सैलरी बढ़ा रहे हैं ताकि वो अपनी तरफ अट्रैक्ट कर सके, राइट। सो ऑल दिस इज हैपनिंग बिकॉज ऑफ इनविजिबल हैंड, एंड बीच में कोई गवर्नमेंट का कोई रोल नहीं है, कहीं पे भी गवर्नमेंट का रोल आ नहीं रहा। अब एज्यूमिंग कि अगर सपोजिटली यहाँ पे सैलरी ये वाली फर्म नहीं बढ़ाती, राइट, अगर सैलरी वो नहीं बढ़ाती और वो सेम वेज रेट ही रखती है कि ठीक है हम वर्कर्स को हायर कर रहे हैं बट हम ज़्यादा सैलरी नहीं देंगे, तो इससे क्या होगा, वर्कर्स आएंगे नहीं तो फिर आप ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर पाओगे। जब आप ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर पाओगे तो आपका कॉस्ट बढ़ जाएगा। क्यों कॉस्ट बढ़ जाएगा, क्योंकि शॉर्ट सप्लाई हो गई है, you're not producing cars according to the demand of the people, and hence what you'll do is you'll increase the cost, right। अब अगर आप अपनी कार की कॉस्ट इंक्रीज कर रहे हैं तो ऑब्वियसली कस्टमर्स दूसरी कार को खरीदने चले जाएंगे, बिकॉज ऑब्वियसली the car will be out of their budget, right। So all this happens automatically with the help of invisible hand, right। Now let's go back. See, the next point is laissez-faire, right। Now laissez-faire is basically a French phrase that translates to leave us alone. So this basically means leave us alone. Now it is the belief that economies and businesses function best when there is no interference by the government. In fact, the government is seen as an obstacle to economic growth and development. So actually in the 18th century, French economists became upset with taxes and subsidies that were being imposed on their businesses. So they believed that governments should leave the individual businesses alone, except few areas where government intervention is necessary. So in the 19th century, this philosophy became mainstream in the US, and it is one of the guiding principles of capitalism and a free market economy, right। So it basically means to leave us alone. Please government, don't interfere in our transactions, don't interfere in our businesses, we can manage on our own. This is what was actually given by Adam Smith. The next point is founder of classical thought, school of thought. Now Adam Smith was the founder of the classical school of thought, and the phrase school of thought basically means what kind of beliefs you have for your economy. For example, what you think the government should do, or how should an economy function according to you, what is your ideology on this. So Adam Smith's ideology was that of a laissez-faire attitude, right। So a laissez-faire attitude by government toward the marketplace will allow the invisible hand to guide everyone in their economic activities, and this will generate economic growth. So he named this thought as classical school of thought, where he said that the economy will always be in equilibrium. Now whatever is produced will be demanded by its people, and there will not be any excess supply or excess demand, and always aggregate supply will be equal to aggregate demand in an economy. Now his work gave generations of economists plenty to think about and expand upon, but the free market approach started to display certain problems, such as large gaps in distribution of wealth, poor treatment of workers, and lack of safety in the workplace, right। So then came Karl Marx. He said that, oh, it's an exploitation, right? So Karl Marx, he was a German economist and political scientist who lived from 1818 to 1883. He looked at capitalism from a more pessimistic and revolutionary viewpoint. Where Adam Smith saw harmony and growth, Marx saw instability, struggle, and decline. Now, he was born in the middle of the Industrial Revolution into a middle-class family in Prussia. Why did actually Marx object to capitalism? He said that basically there are two class, right? uh, there are basically two class. One is the class of capitalist, which are the owners of machines, property, infrastructure, etc. Basically he is the one who has the capital to invest in, and also have the organizational skills to build a factory. And the other class is the class of workers, who own nothing but the right to sell their labor in exchange for wages. Now, all value is created by the labor involved in producing whatever is being produced. So, a capitalist profits come from exploiting labor, that is, from underpaying workers for the value that they are actually creating. Now, this gives rise to class struggle, right? After all, there will come a point when workers will fight for their rights and won't be suppressed under these capitalists. So the tension between capitalists and workers will only intensify over time. Hence, he predicted that a time will come when the workers will fight for themselves and hence would create a more equitable society. So he believed that this struggle would ultimately destroy capitalism. Therefore, Marx predicted the fall of capitalism and movement of society towards communism, right? Communism, a stateless, classless, egalitarian society without any private property or nationality, in which the people, or let's say the workers, will own the means of production and thus will have no need to exploit labor for profit. Clearly, Marx's thinking had a tremendous impact on many societies, particularly on USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in the 20th century. And Marx and his frequent co-author Friedrich Engels also, they both were outraged at the hardships faced by the working classes of industrial European cities, and they channeled this anger into two monumental written works that formed on the basis of the modern communism. So the one was Communist Manifesto, which was published in 1848, and the another one, the 4-volume one, Das Kapital, which was published in 1867. So remember these two books written by Karl Marx. And the Marx beliefs, theories and predictions represent a school of thought which is called Marxism. Now, Marx's skepticism about capitalism initiated an ongoing conversation about its shortcoming and how it can be improved. So in practice, however, two events have undermined Marx's theories. First is the fact that in a socialist, centrally planned economies, they have proven far less, they're far less efficient at producing and delivering goods and services as compared to capitalist systems. Second is that workers' incomes have actually risen over time, which undercuts the theory that labor is exploited in the name of profit. And if workers' incomes are rising, they are clearly sharing in the growth of the economy. So in a very real sense, they are sharing in the profits. So while Marx's theory have been discredited, they are fascinating and worth knowing. And we do see some weaknesses in capitalism. For instance, large companies do enjoy certain advantages over small ones and can absorb or undercut them, right? So while he was no Marxist, our third economist, John Maynard Keynes, was highly influential in confronting the dilemmas of capitalism in the early 20th century, right? So now let's look at John Maynard Keynes. Now, John Maynard Keynes, he was a British economist and financial genius who lived from 1883 to 1946. Also examined capitalism, and he came up with some extremely influential views, and they were however quite different from those of Karl Marx and, for that matter, Adam Smith too. In 1936, he published his general theory of employment, interest and money. Again, this is important. Remember the book and the year. written and published by Keynes. He was born into an educated family. While his contributions to economics were extensive, Keynes is most famous for his ideas about the Great Depression, the major economic crisis of the 20th century. The Depression's effects were felt worldwide from roughly the year 1930s to the mid 1940s. The United States saw unemployment increase from 3% to 25%, and their national income got half. So, moreover, there was no clear path out of the depression, right, which led people to seriously question whether Smith's invisible hand was still guiding things along. So, was this worldwide collapse of economic activity the end of capitalism? So, Keynes believed that there was only one way out, and that was for the government to start spending in order to put money into the private sector pockets and get demand for goods and services for, running up the economy again. So basically, Keynesian economics is an approach to economic policy that favors using the government's power to spend, tax, and borrow to keep the economy stable and growing, right? And Keynes believed that the government should support the economy, and Keynes also argued that only the government had the resources to spend the money that individual consumers and businesses could not. And so, in order to fight against Great Depression, the role of government sector should increase tremendously. So, the larger significance of Keynes' work lies in the view he put forward about the role of government in a capitalist economy, right? And basically, among many other economists, Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Keynes, they are widely recognized as most influential. Right now, Smith because he founded and formalized the science of economics, Marx because he challenged capitalism and had such a forceful impact on society and politics, and Keynes because he prompted new practices as well as new theories in the world of economic policy. Keynes also played a key role in founding of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and in other political economic measures taken at the end of the World War II, right? Now, let's look at the factors of production. Now, if you look around yourself, you'll find tables, chairs, other furniture, doors, television, and so many man-made things. Now, imagine you have a wooden table in front of you. How is the wooden table made? You know that wooden furniture is made up of wood, right? And how can one get wood? Of course, from trees. So wood is basically a raw material which finished itself into a final goods like table, right? So in this slide, we're going to know the factors of production. Now, factors of production are the building blocks of the economy, right? Anything that helps in production process is the factor of production. They are what people use to produce goods and services. Economists divide the factors of production into four categories, which is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. Let's look at the first factor, which is labor. We're looking at labor. So the labor is the effort that people contribute to the production of goods and services. One important thing to note here is that this effort can be mental or physical. For example, labor resources include the work done by the waiter who brings your food at the local restaurant, as well as the engineer who designed the bus that transports you to school. The income earned by the labor resources is called wages and is the largest source of income for most of the people. Now let's come to the second factor, which is land. We're talking about land. Now this includes any natural resource used to produce goods and services. One uses the land to produce goods. It is the primary and natural factor of production. Now, one important thing to note here is that it includes not just land, but anything that comes from the land. Some common land or natural resources are water, oil, copper, natural gas, coal, and forest, right? So, land resources are the raw materials used in the production process. These resources can be renewable, such as forest, or non renewable, such as oil or natural gas. And the income that resource owners earn in return for land resources is called rent, right? Now, let's look at the third factor of production, which is capital. Right now, think of capital as the machinery, tools, and buildings which humans use to produce goods and services. Capital refers to all man made resources used in the production process. I would like to clarify one point here, which is that don't treat money as capital, since money is not a productive resource in the language of economics. So, while money can be used to buy capital, it is the capital good that is used to produce goods and services. I will explain this with the help of an example. A carpenter uses a hammer to fix a nail in the wall, right? He does not use rupees 200 note, that is money, to fix the nail in the wall. So I hope you got an idea what I'm trying to say. So some common examples of capital include hammers, computers, delivery vans, etc. One important thing to note here is that capital differs based on the worker and the type of work being done. For example, a doctor may use a stethoscope and an examination room to provide medical services. I may use textbooks, desk, and a whiteboard to give you educational services, right? So what capital we will be using depends on the type of work we are doing for rendering our services, and the income earned by the owners of the capital resources is interest. Now, the fourth and the last factor of production is entrepreneurship. So an entrepreneur is a person who combines the other factors of production, which is land, labor, and capital, to earn a profit. He is the person, or she is the person, who decides what to produce, where to produce, and how to produce. A person who takes these decisions along with the associated risk is an entrepreneur. Now, the most successful entrepreneurs are innovators who find new ways to produce goods and services, or who develop new goods and services to bring to the market. Now, think of the entrepreneurship of Henry Ford or Bill Gates, right? Now, the payment to entrepreneurship is profit. Now, remember, goods and services are scarce because the factors of production used to produce them are scarce. In case you've forgotten, scarcity is described as limited quantities of resources to meet unlimited wants. Now consider a pair of denim blue jeans. Now the denim is made of cotton grown on the land. The land and water used to grow the cotton is limited and could have been used to grow a variety of different crops. The workers who cut and sewed the denim in the factory are limited labor resources who could have been producing other goods and services in the economy. The machines in the factory used to produce the jeans are limited capital resources that could have been used to produce other goods. Now, this scarcity of resources means that producing some goods and services leaves other goods and services unproduced, right? So I hope you understood chapter 1, Introduction to Microeconomics. Thank you so much.